Hello and welcome. I'm so excited today. We're here with Julie Lee, who is the author of Brother's Keeper from Holiday House. And Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're so glad. And oh my goodness, 4-star reviews. Everybody is just rapturous over your novel. So tell us a little bit about your novel, how it came to be. And this is a really personal story for you too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, in writing this story, I wanted to highlight the Korean War, but I also felt that it was important to give some sense of what was happening in the few years leading up to the war, because historical events never occur in a vacuum, and to view the Korean War through a narrow scope would not give a complete picture of the conflict and of people's mindsets at the time. So through flashbacks, I wanted to give at least a hint of what was happening, during the Japanese occupation, the brief but joyful period of liberation, and then when the Soviets came in and then Northern Korea turned to a communist state. And of course, I relied heavily on my mother's experiences to write this story. Like Sora, my mother loved school and wanted to go to college one day, but faced some opposition for being a girl. And she also looked after her younger brothers when they were briefly separated during the journey. She also fled in the middle of a cold November night, experienced that bombing on the hill, and scrambled on board that crowded train to Busan. So of course there were some differences between Sora and my mother as well. But I would say my mother's actual experiences were in some instances more harrowing and in other instances less harrowing than Sora's.
Wow. You packed so much into this novel. And this is a middle grade novel, so the sweet spot for the readers for this would be that 10 to 12. And Sora is 12 herself, right? In the
Yes, at the start of the novel she is.
Yeah, and her little brother is 8. So,
yes.
and I think it's an interesting time to think about this right now because so many kids who are distance learning are finding themselves responsible for younger siblings right now.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I mean, I think I consider Sora to be just an ordinary girl living through extraordinary times, much like children today who are definitely living through some extraordinary times right now. And as they do spend more time at home with their families and their siblings, they may find that that sibling relationship is growing closer and more contentious at the same time, which is a lot like Sora's relationship with her brothers, something that I hope readers can relate to. And in the story, throughout Sora's physical journey, she must also come to terms with her role as a nuna, which in Korean means older sister to a younger brother. It's a term of respect, responsibility, but also some sacrifice on her part. So for Sora, it's a label that can stand in the way of her dreams of going to school and living a life that goes against tradition and her mother's stifling expectations. I think for her, it's a title loaded with responsibility, some resentment, but also love. And in the end, she doesn't advocate for herself by seeing things only from her perspective. She begins to see things from her brother's and even her mother's perspective, making peace with them without ever giving up herself or giving up her dreams. And I think by better understanding those around her, she begins to better understand herself. And so hopefully students can see that and use it to help them navigate their own relationships at home with a greater sense of understanding and compassion.
at the same time, this is also an adventure story. I mean, it's a harrowing journey, and you just want to turn the pages as fast as you can.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that the pacing that you have in this book is just breathtaking and makes for a really, really, really exciting book. And I don't want to give anything away, but an emotional ride as well.
Right.
So I'll just leave it at that. That's all good. But the other thing you said, you mentioned context, giving context to the journey and to what was happening before and then during this history. And I think we're talking more about refugees than we ever have before, but it's still not nearly enough. And I think that that's an important thing for teachers to understand, and the kids who read this book too, is this is just one of many refugee stories. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. And, in terms of using it in the classroom and about the, angle of the refugee, crisis worldwide, that is definitely a way to use this as a teaching tool. I mean, I think for social studies in general, this would be a great teaching tool. Certainly if there's a unit on the Korean War, students can use this to help them remember and process facts and dates and events through story. By reading Swoda's life and going through the back matter where there are photographs, I think students can experience history on a more emotional level, making the past come alive for them. And as you said, in current events, we could use this book to spark a discussion about the refugee crises around the world and how we should not ignore the plight of others. And also just on a more, I guess, life skills or character building level, teachers can use this to talk about courage and perseverance in the way that Swoda fights for herself and her family without giving up on her dreams. And I think just in general, as with most books, Brother's Keeper can also be used to teach empathy. I mean, if students or if readers can see themselves in this girl who lived during what is known as the Forgotten War on a tiny peninsula an ocean away, then perhaps they can begin to see how we are all similar, more than, rather than different.
Yes, and you mentioned the back matter, and I have to say, kudos on the back matter. So much to dive into there for the child who becomes really fascinated that you're in history, and it's always nice to see the photographs and get a sense that it's grounded in real experiences. Of course, you make that clear, but the back matter really brings it home, and it's great, especially for social studies. But geography, this could be very cross-curricular for sure. Transportation, I mean, how physically getting someplace.
Right.
Lots
And
of
what I do love the back matter of this book with the photographs and even the timeline.
Oh, yeah.
I think the timeline could be a great way to just sort of pivot back to the story, taking the facts of that timeline and pivoting back to the story and using it as a way to spark discussion, about sort of aligning the actual events of history, with Swoda's life and her journey. I really tried hard to keep it very, accurate and, every step of her journey, I'm thinking about what's happening in the war at that time. Where would they be or not be, or where could they be? So
Right.
so I think the timeline is a very useful thing as well.
I'm a sucker for a good timeline, so that's great. And just congratulations. This is
Thank you.
And to come out of the gate with 4-star reviews, and who knows what other wonderful kudos are waiting as we come to the close of this year. But it's just a wonderful read, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Oh, thank you.
Brother's Keeper, and I hope that everyone who sees this reads it and shares it, because it is truly an exceptional book that will touch you and will stay in your heart forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.